Thank you everyone for the invitation. First of all, my name is Abdelrahman Melegy, and I work as the head of data with Transport for Cairo. We're a private consultancy that focuses on solving mobility challenges in Cairo and other global South countries. Now, our team, we're a kind of a young company. Our team is composed of four departments, four teams. We have the data lab, the one I'm heading, which specializes in data collection, modeling, and simulation. We have the TFC Urban Mobility Lab, which focuses on research and policy papers and trainings, training programs. And we have the Root Lab team, which I will talk about in a little bit. This is the tech team that focuses on developing software tools. And lastly, we have the TFC Maps team, which focuses on creating passenger information systems. Now, today I'm going to talk very briefly about, first of all, why do we need data? I know most of you are already familiar with this, but I'll be highlighting some points. A problem statement, and I will take Cairo as the main example here, but I'm sure this will draw some similarities with many of the contexts from the attendees that are present here today. I will talk about digitalization and the methodology we've developed to map these popular transport services. And lastly, how we can move towards more sustainable data specifically for popular transport. So why data? If we look at it from the different stakeholders' perspective, of course, the government, they want to know where to invest, how to prioritize investments, for example, how to maximize efficiency of mobility in cities. For citizens, we can be talking about the lack of information. So how do I get from point A to point B using transportation? When will I get there, etc. For researchers, we can be looking at topics like how to promote active travel in my city, especially if my city has popular transport modes as the most prevalent modes, and what is the effect of applying certain interventions in the PT network city. So some of you might be familiar with this pyramid, and it's based on information system, the industry, that we start with data, and from data we build on top of that, we start to get information, and from information, when we combine that with the contextual knowledge and the qualitative knowledge, if we can call it that, we start to get some knowledge about the network, the city that we're dealing with. Lastly, we get wisdom. This is where we can start making informed decision making. So I'm gonna give a quick example here about why data, and specifically for a project that I'll be talking about in a little bit, planning BRT in the Greater Cairo region. And this is how the ring road, which will host the Cairo's first BRT, currently looks like. You can see there are all different kinds of modes running currently on the ring road. You have motorbikes, you have even bicycles on a highway, you have minibus taxis, or what we call microbuses, or some call matatus, and so on, big buses and so on. So all kinds of services. So to go into the problem statement. Now, of course, these two images show two different aspects of the problem. One of them is the kind of dynamic services that paratransit or popular transport offers. But this also means that having no stops can result in affecting the traffic flow, affecting the passenger safety, and so on and so forth, overcrowded vehicles due to lack of proper operation planning, and so on. On the image on the right, we can see that, and this is a standard, thing to see in the bus terminals in Cairo, where you have the passenger information or the routes painted. So most of these routes are actually out of date, and we no longer use the three number numeric serial for the buses. So most of those are very old and outdated. So we're talking about static data being out of date. Now, to talk about Cairo in more depth, this map on the left shows the tram network, which was in Cairo, starting this network of trams was in there starting from the late 1800s up until the 2014, where the last tram line unfortunately was removed. Now, why I'm displaying this to we have to understand the past to be able to plan better for the future. So when these kind of rail-based services, scheduled and so on, were removed, they got replaced more or less by all sorts of different services. So this is what we have today. We have all shades, let's say, of formality or informality in the public transportation services. We have the microbuses, as I've mentioned, or what some call the minibus taxis. We have even the small 8-seaters vans. We have the tuk-tuks, of course. We have the formal, quote unquote, Cairo Transport Authority buses, or government public operator. And we have the metro, the subway, and electric train, and so on and so forth. So we still have some rail services which are operational. Now, so this is the landscape of Cairo. Now, when we talk about popular transport and why it exists, I'm not going to go through that because my colleagues have already spoken extensively about that during the first two sessions. So we know why it exists: unmet demand, passenger-defined stops, so you can walk less, take the bus from anywhere, and so on. But we want to take into account these characteristics and how they affect digitalization of the services, as I'll explain now. So, of course, all these kinds of services from all around the world, or the global south, if I may, they share these similar characteristics. This image is from Kampala, Uganda. Very similar, we've been there, very similar to Cairo. Now, how this translates into data challenges. First, how can you define a route? By our definition of a route, it has to have somewhat a consistent origin and a consistent destination, right? This is not necessarily the case with popular transport. You have deviation in itineraries, sometimes based on passenger demand. So passengers on board will be somewhat affecting the itinerary itself of the route, if they want to be dropped off in a certain place and so on. Defining stops, we've talked about that. Defining terminals, a formal terminal can be like designated by the government, can be with shelters, well equipped, or it can be a street corner where vehicles gather. So when you're doing mapping, when you're doing digitalization of these kinds of services, you have to be objective, and you have to be observing the environment as it is. So a terminal is a terminal, if it's a point of origin or a point of destination, no matter how quote unquote formal it is. Now let's dive into digitalization, and I'll take the story of TFC quickly as an example also. Now, we want to do mapping, we want to quantify the network. So this map on the left shows what we had to start with. So we only had 3 subway or metro lines that you can see on the map, and literally no digital data on bus services whatsoever, either the formal nor the informal. So we wanted to approach this mapping from 3 levels of maturity. The first level, geography. The second level, so geography, where the routes are, where did they go, the itineraries, the stops, and the terminals. And the second level is the temporal data, so the actual travel times that these services take, and commercial travel times, because we know how very dynamic these services are. So it's not directly related just to traffic congestion, but other parameters as well. The travel time and the headways, of course, the frequencies. We construct like virtual schedules for these services. And lastly, the system adequacy from the passenger point of view. So we wanted to explore affordability, the accessibility of the service, the acceptability of all these different modes, and so on. We started with a small team of 5, and this is important. Now we're tackling Cairo, a city of about 20 million residents and a huge public transportation network, as we discovered later. But this process of digitalization is very accessible, in our opinion, and it's very replicable. You can replicate. So we started with a very small team of 5 people, and we used an app that is used to, it's a jogging app. It was a jogging app at the time. To be able to record waypoints, to be able to record GPS traces, and so on. And we used to do these onboard surveys where the field researchers take the bus service from start to end and record the stops where people boarded and alighted throughout the day. Now, of course, to begin this, we have to do something first called an identification, where we go and visit bus terminals, and we, based on hearing the destination that is being called, and we circle around the area multiple times to make sure we captured all services. And we captured the different clusters from which one route can be loading passengers, if you know what I mean. So in one bus terminal, you might have different locations where the buses go to the same destination. This is very important to capture to understand the actual volume of these transport services. And of course, as I mentioned, we did we focused on passenger surveys as well to try and capture these different aspects of the network and relate them all together. So if we look at an example of the geography collected, we started to build the network one by one. Of course, this was based on many other parameters such as funding, such as availability of staff, and so on. And one by one, we started constructing this network. Inner city routes, intercity routes, and so on. Now, when we talk about the stops, we mentioned how we don't have regular stops, but we can, by doing multiple onboard surveys, we can have a good enough that we start to identify clusters where people usually board and alight, and we call those virtual stops. Now, why do we have to go through that? Because the standards, and this is very important, the data standards right now, if we're talking about something like GTFS, General Transit Fee Specification. So, sorry about that. So, all this methodology we had to incorporate into a software tool to be able to replicate this process later for ourselves and for other people doing something similar as well. That's why we developed RouteLab. RouteLab is a software suite that's composed of a mobile app, a web dashboard, and it's basically a field research project management tool for mapping popular transport modes in particular, and also acts as a content management system for the different popular transport network components. So, for example, it's used to clean data, it's used to follow data collection KPIs. Keep in mind that this is all based on manual field research and not automated field research, as we view this as necessary at this particular stage of transition. So you can also use it to define locations, sample locations where you conduct your surveys, for example, with the passengers. So geographic sampling, temporal sampling, if we want to look at specific parameters throughout the day in different time intervals and so on. I'm proud to say that we've managed to, so you have a software tool that incorporated this methodology within it, and we've managed to apply this in different African countries, cities, and in different African countries. So sometimes with our direct intervention as TFC, and sometimes with the sole use, like independent use of other consultants using the same tools. So to talk briefly about outcomes, now you have trip planning. As I mentioned, we convert these popular transport modes into digital data using GTFS, General Transit Fee Specification, which, even though it's based on Global North standards, you can fit it with this methodology to be used for popular transport modes. And this image shows integration of different paratransit modes with formal modes as well, and the subway, the metro, and so on. Now, this example, it's a very, some of you, many of you have seen this before, how to measure job accessibility with public transport. And this is very important because this whole methodology that we talked about, the more accurate it is, capturing accurate volumes, capturing all the services that are out there, the more accurate these results are, and you manage to see who's underrepresented in terms of population and in terms of accessibility to jobs, and who has good accessibility. So based on this was actually a project with the World Bank, and based on these results, the World Bank presented to the Ministry of Transport, the Egyptian Ministry of Transport, that the most important corridor to prioritize in terms of public transport investment at the time being was the northern Cairo ring road. And I'll get to that in a moment. So also another example is using the wonderful package called GTFS to EMIS, or to emissions, developed by colleagues in Brazil. I think the center was called EPEA, or Institute for Applied Economic Research, which is based in Brazil. A wonderful package, open source, that you can use GTFS data, again, representing popular transport, to be able to model emissions, both on a very granular temporal scale and on a very granular geographic scale as well. So this example shows areas in Cairo in the off-peak period, evening off-peak period, and the amount of emissions in CO2. Now, of course, you can also, the TFC maps team, I've talked about this, you can create all sorts of beautiful maps to be printed and placed in some stations or some popular bus stops to aid passenger information in a more physical, non-digital way. Now, to go very briefly about the Cairo Ring Road, I've mentioned the problem statement already. We have a BRT that's currently being planned and will have a pilot operating in a couple of months. Now, the idea here, okay, so we have this proposition to the Ministry of Transport that you need to construct a BRT there. So the Ministry of Transport took that, said, okay, we're going to cover the whole ring road, this line in green, this dotted line in green. We're going to cover the whole of the ring road, and actually we're going to prevent the microbuses or the minibus taxis from coming on the ring road. So they will no longer be allowed to operate on the ring road, and it will just be the BRT. Now, this kind of approach may sound familiar to some of you. And this, of course, posed the challenge of, okay, so we have this current network with all these very dynamic characteristics. When you're going to replace this, and you're going to say only the BRT will run, you have to really make sure that you'll be able to replace all the pros, these kinds of services as well, if that's the kind of approach. So when we look at that, when we do this kind of mapping, we can see the volumes of boarding and alighting at the BRT stations. We can so we can skip, in my opinion, we can skip the classic four-step transport demand models and do what is called direct demand modeling, or rapid demand assessment, that measures the passenger flow in different times of the day from all modes. And we come up with numbers like these on a very granular scale, as you can see on a trip segment level. Now, when we presented these results to the government, the reply was, oh, these numbers are too specific. Like somehow you need to push these numbers to be higher. And this is where we have to hold our ground, because you spend all this time developing this methodology to be able to accurately represent these services. So this is where it's important not to be affected by the politics behind, whatever projects. And this is where it's important to trust the numbers. But on trusting the numbers, now, this example, again, it's related to the BRT project, but it highlights the importance of qualitative information as well. And by qualitative information in this context, I mean field visits to see. So you've done your mapping, you have your maps, you have your numbers, you have all of that. You have to visit the field and see for yourself on a qualitative level. Why? This is one example where you see these points of clusters of boarding and alighting that was measured from the microbuses. Now, the microbuses, as we mentioned, they stop anywhere, right? So if I'm a passenger, I can stop the microbus anywhere on the ring road and take it to wherever I want to go. But the BRT will not be like that. It will be like specific stations. So when you replace the BRT completely, replacing the microbuses, you'll be eliminating some areas. So when we done the first round of analysis, we came up with this list of points, stops, and you see this gap in the middle where it has a cluster. So we went to the field with the government, and when we arrived at that spot at the beginning, I was there. I was kind of worried because I was being asked, how come this area in your data has this cluster? You know, we're standing on a huge block of cement, and there's no way from an initial look that you can get passengers, pedestrians out there. But in a few minutes, we managed to see how people they're overriding these extensions of the ring road, these huge blocks of cement that prevented pedestrian access to the ring road because it was widened recently. And they use wooden ladders. Sometimes they break into, if there's a tunnel, they break into part of the road and they have to literally crawl to get up to the ring road. So why is this important? Because if we haven't visited the location, and this is a whole informal setup underneath this small cluster. Now going back, if we went ahead with these stations, we would have eliminated this area, and it's about a 3-kilometer, 4-kilometer walk. Now imagine a person with carrying loads, or a person with, that has trouble walking, especially in the Cairo weather conditions, having to have this kind of service replaced completely and having to walk all of this distance. So I'll wrap up quickly and talk about how we can move towards sustainability for popular transport. Now, you have to have institutional capacity, and some of you already discussed this. How we measured this? First, by the level of involvement from the government and from the local stakeholders during trainings, by doing job shadowing, by directing our team, influencing our direction. These are all KPIs that needs to be there from a consultant point of view to measure the local stakeholder involvement. And again, from our point of view, how our different projects outputs align with the local stakeholders' expectations, that we're not coming in with a parachute and dictating what's important and what's not important. And lastly, integrating processes and tools from whatever project you're working on in the existing stakeholders' workflows, so they can easily integrate these workflows, such as mapping, in the future. The importance of e-payment. So this is why I was talking about transitions. So with the prevalence of e-payment, whether it's mobile apps, whether it's cards in new mass transit services, this is very important to maintain a digital database that is integratable with the existing popular transport modes, to be able to have this vision of the full network. And the tapping to climate funding. So we have a lot of, we see as consultants, a lot of electrification or e-mobility focused funding in the recent years. So this is very important to use this, tap into this climate-based funding to enhance the insights to the popular transport networks. Of course, the focus on PT and NMT versus the focus on private cars. In Cairo and in many countries in the global south, I'm not sure what's the case in in South America or Latin America, but we're investing a lot in widening roads, building bridges, overpasses, and whatnot, because we're focusing on this traffic flow, enhancing traffic flow as much as possible, without looking into the climate, necessarily looking into the climate repercussions and the urban fabric. Last important thing I want to highlight is the importance of open data. You as consultants, as government, as whatever, if you have data, specifically when we're talking about public transport, it should be open by design. And I put here two examples. One is, of course, OpenStreetMap, which is, you can say it's the open Google Maps or the open Bing Maps. You can, countless research was based on OpenStreetMap. So this is a great project to aid and to credit in our work. And the Digital Transport for Africa Coalition, which TFC is part of, and actually hosts many GTFS feeds and GIS, geographic data, for the public transport networks in Africa and in also Latin American cities as well. So please feel free to visit this website at any point if you haven't already. And thank you so much.